Urban Cultural Studies,
the podcast.
Interviews.
And welcome to Urban Cultural Studies podcast. Today our guest is Stephen Vilaseca. He is an associate editor of the Journal of Urban Cultural Studies and an assistant professor at Northern Illinois University. He has published articles in the Bulletin of Hispanic Studies, Letras Hispanas, Revista de Literatura y Cultura, the Arizona Journal of Hispanic Cultural Studies, and Transitions, Journal of Franco-Iberian Studies. Stephen, I've just read your article. It's called From Graffiti to Street Art, How Urban Artists Are Democratizing Spanish City Centers and Streets.
That's right.
Where you launch in that article from graffiti to a range of problems that are they're social, they're political, they're economic, they're urban.
Yeah, I'm interested in three cities, in Barcelona, Bilbao, and Valencia.
There's a lot to talk about. We're dealing with issues of public space and private property here, with community activism,
Sure.
With regional and national politics and culture, with what you say in your article is a constructive way of engaging with the city. Now, I want to begin with a concrete image from your article.
Okay.
There's a point at which you discuss an instance of street art where there's a woman walking by a stretch of wall in front of what looks to be a vacant urban lot. And on the wall you can read that there are letters 5 or 6 foot high reading "Esta pared es mía" in Spanish.
Yes, the English translation would be, "This wall is mine."
Take us through the importance of that image.
Well, this was a project by Esquif, a graffiti and street artist from Valencia. For Esquif, the most interesting element about working in the street is not the art, but the street itself, meaning that he is very concerned about the progressive privatization of urban space.
Yeah.
So he wanted to see how people would respond if he wrote in oversized letters, and this is important, they were capital letters. So it was as if this wall was screaming, "This wall is mine," on a wall that ran along a section of a busy, very busy street in the heart of Valencia.
All right.
Central to his experiment, or very important to his experiment, was the fact that he left the intervention unsigned.
So he didn't want his name on it. He didn't put his name on it.
Imagine the reactions. A person walking by would wonder, well, whose wall is it?
And so immediately in asking that question, whose wall is it, right? The relationship between urban space and property is brought up.
Right. A whole series of questions come to mind. Who wrote the message? Did the owner of the wall write it so that no one else would paint it? And if he or she did, it would be a contradiction because the wall was painted to prevent it from being painted, right. By another graffiti artist. Another question that would come up would be, why has that message appeared there? Esquif told me that many people pass in front of the wall every day. But curiously enough, the owner of the lot never walks by. So who owns the appearance of the wall? Why should the appearance of the wall pertain to the property owner who never sees it?
I see.
This type of artistic intervention keeps the interpretive field open with regard to urban space and its possible uses.
Stephen, when you say it keeps the interpretive field open, what do you mean?
Well, Ben, unlike graffiti, which uses closed codes understood only by those in the graffiti community, this project can be read and understood by anyone. It's a project that, by leaving the doors open to interpretation, is able to generate debate and discussion.
Well, and that makes sense. So it can be interpreted in different ways, in variable ways. It can be linked with specific struggles, whatever might be going on at a given moment. And you would say that this is an example of a constructive method of engaging with the city.
Yes.
I'd like to continue talking more about the relationship between graffiti and street art. What's the history? Can you describe the evolution from one to the other in Spain?
Well, at the risk of sounding reductive, the evolution of graffiti to street art mimics the maturity of the artists themselves.
You're saying their age?
Yes, graffiti in Spain tends to be practiced by irresponsible adolescents.
Yeah.
Whose only interests are to draw attention, express angst, and fit in with their group of friends. Street artists, on the other hand, are usually older, well-educated, and financially self-sufficient. Again, these are just generalizations.
Definitely.
So the impetus for interacting with the street is not so much teen angst as the desire to take advantage of spaces in the city in order to reflect on the city itself.
All right.
Unlike graffiti, street art intends to communicate and send a message. We were talking about closed codes earlier. Street art uses open codes. It is also very ephemeral and does not seek the permanence of graffiti.
The question might be asked then, does graffiti in fact seek permanence?
Yeah, I was struck by that too. Fragil, a Spanish street artist, explained to me in an interview that while graffiti most certainly subverts authority,
Yeah.
it also ironically reproduces the norm of private property. He said something very interesting. He said, graffiti is actually very conservative with space. He said, once a space is painted, it becomes the property of the person who painted it.
So you could say that graffiti ends by reproducing the very same relations it seeks to contest. So what's preserved in any case is a privatizing notion of space.
Unbelievable, right?
It is.
Street art, on the other hand, welcomes the intervention of other artists. In fact, street artists want their work to interact with that of others. That is why street art is typically found in the city centers.
Yeah.
Whereas graffiti in Spain fills the walls lining train tracks on the city outskirts. With regard to form, street art consists not only of spray-painted content like graffiti, but also paste-ups, what are called paste-ups, stencils, and stickers.
Okay, both street art and graffiti, and I can see the distinction you're pointing to, but both of these urban practices, these art forms, they often share similar consequences.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first public figures of graffiti in Spain was arguably a guy named Juan Carlos Argüello, or Muelle, who, and this is in 1987 Madrid, he was caught tagging the base of a very famous emblematic statue they have there in the Puerta del Sol, which is the statue of the bear and the strawberry tree,
right.
El Madroño, and he was fined in the end 2,500 pesetas. This was before the introduction of the euro to Spain, of course. From what I've read, that wasn't all bad as far as his career goes. But it's not always such a good thing to be caught in the act. That is, we're talking about what is, by and large, an illegal practice.
Yes, graffiti and street art are illegal acts that can carry fines of up to 3,000 euros.
3,000 euros.
I know. You would think such a hefty fine would stop graffiti altogether. It has been a deterrent, but nevertheless, there is a growing interest in street art and street artists. The most well-known example is Banksy in England.
Yeah.
Because of the current repressive climate in cities like Barcelona, the issue of how to achieve recognition while at the same time maintaining anonymity is a problematic one. Street art is so ephemeral. So artists, what do? They document and share photos of the work on websites like Flickr. And Ben, I'm sure you've heard of Flickr.
Yeah.
But rarely do they put photos of themselves caught in the act. Spanish street artist Dr. Case developed a way to do so.
Tell us a bit about Dr. Case and what he does.
Sure. Instead of using large pixels to disguise identity, a technique employed in police photos and videos, Dr. Case decided to fuse art and artist.
Okay.
In his 2012 project called Symbiosis: Artists with Character, what he did, he took pictures of graffiti writers and street artists, digitally removed their faces from the photographs, and replaced them with the faces of one of their creations, merging the physical bodies of the artists with the imaginative, symbolic faces of their fictional characters.
Yeah, this stuff is really fascinating. I'm looking at a few of the images you include in the article, and you can just see immediately how the producer of the art, the artist, is fused visually with his own creation. And there's, this is definitely blurring the division between the artist and the art.
Yeah,
What I
yeah.
think so interesting, and you write this in the article, for you, Dr. Case's project is much more than just about protecting anonymity. And you say this is about the kind of relationship street artists in Spain have with urban space. Can you explain that?
Yeah, the blurring of the boundary between artist and art in Dr. Case's project mimics the street artist's continually evolving relationship with their exterior world. Street artists move through the city without making a distinction between private and public walls,
Right.
private and public shutters, doors. They engage unrestrictedly with the city. The defining characteristic, I would say, of the street artist is his or her register of coexistence between the street, self, and art.
Street self and art.
For me, street artists are modeling a new body that we all really should try to imitate, one that I call the emergent urban body. Emergent because it is constantly in a process of being created again and again, and urban because it lives in the city.
This notion of the urban as a process is something I always like coming back to. And you see this rear its head in so many distinct urban voices, urban theorists, critics, in different ways sometimes, nuanced ways. But that list includes Jane Jacobs, Henri Lefebvre. There's a Spanish thinker, Manuel Delgado. You have this idea that urban space, it's a process.
Well,
This is usually meant to signal an inclusivity, a right to the city, Henri Lefebvre would say, a commingling with the built environment, a community engagement with city space, and so on.
yes, a truly democratic urban space is one in which everyone has the same right to use the street. Ideally, urban space should not be privatized, and I know that's a provocative statement. Urban artists defend the momentary appropriation, utilization, and an enjoyment of urban space, and not only expect but encourage others to alter the space after they have used it.
What are the laws or attitudes that allow street artists to practice their craft, or else that encroach on their artistic production?
Well, Barcelona, Bilbao, and Valencia all have passed municipal ordinances or laws that restrict the practice of graffiti and street art. Valencia is the easiest in which to do street art.
And why do you say that? Why is that the case?
Well, for two reasons. One, the abundance of empty lots in disuse in Carmen, the city center, and two, the fact that artistic murals are a legal exception to the criminalization of graffiti, meaning that artistic murals are permitted in those empty lots. I don't know if you've ever been to Valencia, Ben, but there are many examples of large-scale spray-painted street art there.
I've been spending much more time in Madrid when I go to Spain, but I definitely need to get to Valencia.
Bilbao, on the other hand, is hyper-vigilant of its public space because it wants to avoid street violence linked to the terrorist group ETA. Instead of these beautifully crafted artwork, all these great murals, and such as that found in Valencia's Carmen, the Casco Viejo of Bilbao, which is also the city center, is lined with grayed out walls.
Huh.
And what do I mean by grayed out? Well, the city workers actually carry a bucket of gray paint.
Is that
And
right?
whenever they encounter graffiti or street art, they just literally paint over with gray paint, the graffiti and the street art.
Well, tell me about street artist Fragil's Espacio Prohibido project in the city of Bilbao that you mentioned in your article. I think it illustrates how restricted public space is becoming.
Espacio prohibido means prohibited space. Fragile, this Spanish street artist, decided to actually have some fun and sought precisely those spaces in Bilbao that had been painted gray by the municipality. And he either affixed a poster with the words Espacio Prohibido along with the yellow and black markings traditionally used by the police. I'm sure you've seen it before. We all have,
Right.
that outline crime scenes after the crime. Or what he did was he stenciled yellow and black frames that enclosed the grayed out spaces. And it's really interesting what he's doing because no one would have imagined that a graffiti artist or a street artist would ban himself from using
So
public space.
he's essentially out there playing with censorship, with
Right.
the potential censorship of his own art, in fact.
So Fragile was allowed to paint in a prohibited space by appropriating the codes of authority. He marked prohibited space by doing exactly what he was not supposed to do. Interestingly, he told me in an interview with him that another street artist, and I have two photos of this in my article, that another street artist painted inside one of his Espacio Prohibido frames.
So art inside of art.
And the next day, the government of Bilbao painted the interior of the frame gray, right, covering up the other street artist's figure, but left Fragile's frame untouched, which is essentially graffiti also. So we could say just as Fragile appropriated the codes of authority, they, the street, the workers of the city, also misappropriated his codes.
So as they saw it, what he was saying was true, which is to say that those spaces were in fact prohibited.
Right.
There's a lot more we could talk about there. For example, the way the censors under Francisco Franco's dictatorship, which ended in 1975, he died on November 20th. The censors often weren't familiar with the subtleties of artistic or literary discourse, and they surely missed a few things along the way.
Exactly.
But there's another side to this, which is that the state will also officially sponsor graffiti and urban art. So to give you one example, the Festival of Urban Art was held in Gran Canaria, Spain, April 1st through the 4th back in 2004, and it had a budget of 180,000 euros.
Sure.
And you can see a few video games with graffiti themes and urban art themes. But in the cases that you're writing about, we're not talking about money making or these urban strategies of capital accumulation, but rather acts that are all about contesting capital. Is that right?
Well, for example, Barcelona in the 90s used to be a place where graffiti and urban artists could paint openly without fear of being fined, and was even considered the graffiti and urban capital of Europe. In fact, the city of Barcelona supported urban art as a way to foment its image as a progressive and modern city.
And this ties into the Barcelona model.
So Barcelona and other Spanish cities recognized graffiti's potential, as you mentioned, to be an urban strategy of capital accumulation.
Right. There's that interaction between culture and economics, which is so familiar, for example, to readers of the work by Sharon Zukin, her book, for example, The Cultures of Cities from 1995, which taps right into this relationship.
However, the exponential increase in graffiti caused the city of Barcelona to feel that it had lost control of public space. And once that happened, the socialist government passed new laws that criminalized graffiti and urban art. And when public space is increasingly regulated by the state, People begin to feel alienated from it. And in order to combat this alienation, citizens must experience the city as co-authors.
People have to have the right to the city.
What I'm defending is everyone's equal right to momentarily use the public space of the city, not just the right of urban planners, politicians, entrepreneurs, advertisers. What street artists can teach us is to interact unrestrictedly with the built environment instead of accepting the imposed fixed relations of private property and the normalized codes of the state.
So street artists can teach us about what it means for space to be public.
A truly democratic public space is one in which its uses are a constantly repeating, ephemeral enjoyment of the city.
Well, thanks for being here, Stephen.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Stephen Vilaseca's article, From Graffiti to Street Art, How Urban Artists Are Democratizing Spanish City Centers and Streets, is published in Transitions, Journal of Franco-Iberian Studies, Volume 8, 2012. Also, be sure to check out his new book, Barcelonan Ocupas, Squatter Power, now available from Fairleigh Dickinson University Press. Remember that you can access the Journal of Urban Cultural Studies in both print and online formats through Intellect Publishers, and make sure to follow our multi-authored blog for more urban discussions at urbanculturalstudies.wordpress.com.